I guess it's been almost 2 weeks since the shootings happened in Copenhagen. What's the feeling there at the moment?
At the moment, I think people are the daily life is sort of starting to return. And I was just thinking about how, because I'm a journalism student as well, so I've been thinking a lot about how the media has handled the coverage of the shootings and, the time afterwards. And I think the coverage, at least, is starting to be much more political somehow. But the general feeling, I think, is very mixed. I think the shootings have sort of contributed to people talking much more about terror in general and how we sort of, as a society, how do we integrate the Muslims and the Jews and the, how do we sort of deal with the diversity that exists in our society. And I think much more people talk about diversity and also talk about terror and how to prevent it and what should we do. But I don't, at least in my sort of, the people I know, amongst them, we're not afraid and we're not, hostile or anything. At least I don't feel we are. But it's a topic that's being discussed very much. And we talk about what to do and how, if the events of 10 days ago, if that sort of changed how we look upon our society and everything. But in general, I don't feel like a lot of things have changed now.
So is it true that you live in the same district of Copenhagen where the shooter was shot? Is that correct?
Yeah, it is. So I live in the very center of Copenhagen, which is where, I don't know. It's the first shooting was about, I think, 20 minutes from where I live.
Okay.
And which is Østerbro. Then the second shooting was in front of the synagogue in the center of Copenhagen. That's just about 10 minutes from where I live. And the last shooting, the shooting of the shooter, that was, I guess another 10 minutes from where I live. Mm. So I suppose I am right in the middle of everything.
Yeah, wow.
Yeah. It's weird to sort of put things into words because, you talk to your friends and you talk to your tutors and everything about how things are going and what the reactions are. And then, people coming, I heard this story, well, I read this story, blah, blah, blah. And you just sit there and we discuss it all the time. But it's difficult to put it into something, more concrete. But it was really weird because a lot of my friends went out that night. And especially a place called, it's one of the main stations, it's called Nørreport. There are a lot of bars there, and people go out there. And then when my couple of my friends went out there, and the police actually came into the bar and said, "You need to stay here. Don't do anything." And that's in the middle of the night. I think that was at 1 o'clock, midnight, 1 o'clock, when they were evacuating the whole, the whole scene. No, it must have been after 1 o'clock because he was shot at 1. Yeah, so that was afterwards. But they were. We're not used to it, and I think that's the same thing about the things that happened in Sydney. That we're not used to being evacuated and seeing police acting very,
it's not. That's right. It's not until it hits close to home that it really. It really shocks you and things because you read about these things overseas and you think how awful, but you don't actually believe that it would ever happen somewhere close to you. So it's very true. I guess, how does that change your perspective of where you live? Does it change your perspective? Do you feel safe?
To be honest, it doesn't. I find it quite abstract actually, because it's not like I'm walking around. I haven't changed anything I do or say or, the way I act or anything. I do feel, I've always felt, since I moved here, I've always felt that I lived in a, multicultural sort of society. Because there are especially a lot of Muslims where I live. But there are just as many, regular ethnic Danes. and I don't feel like I've changed anything because, you know, in my personal view, there's nothing that I should or can change to make anything better. This was, I know he was a Muslim shooter, but I don't see it as a general sort of behavior from Muslim society. So I don't take any, you know, extra precautions or anything because I don't feel like it's really necessary. This guy, he was without, you know, I don't know too much about it or anything, but, you know, this guy, he wasn't like the Muslims that I know. And I don't feel like you should use him as an example for the Muslim society in general, because there are so many, you know, people and so many stories about young people, especially who've, you know, are just as well educated as you and me. So I don't feel like we should, you know, draw any conclusions about saying that the Muslim people are bad people or anything. The night of the shootings, I did hear a lot of sirens, but, you know, just in general to explain how it felt being there. I was just in my apartment with a friend, having dinner and a few drinks, but we didn't go out. But from my apartment, I heard a lot of sirens. But, you know, the neighborhood is it's not that rough, but there are a lot of things going around with police activity and stuff, because this is mainly, or used to be at least mainly, where the drug dealers were and everything. But the night of the shootings, I did hear a lot of sirens, and I actually didn't think a lot about it until the next morning when I woke up and, you know, I checked my phone. It was early in the morning. I think it was like 5:30, and I think that's half an hour after they shot him, the shooter. And my phone was just, you know, loaded with Twitter updates and Facebook updates from the media. But afterwards, I mean, Sunday I was just walking around and there was a lot of police presence. There still is, actually. You know, that's quite untypical. Because the police is visible somehow, even before the shootings. But now it's just, you walk 10 steps and there's police and they're carrying these huge guns and everything. And that's quite weird to me, at least, because I'm not used to seeing armed police everywhere, and I'm not used to, you know, being confronted with the police, armed police at least.
And it's also true that you were shadowing a journalist on the day. Was it on the day of the shooting or the day after?
Yeah, it was the following Monday. Yeah, yeah.
So what was that like?
It was. Well, it was really interesting, I thought. Because that was the first day of shadowing. I just started studying journalism this semester. Well, I studied in Australia last semester as well, but it was the first day of shadowing that I've done on like a proper newspaper. And I was actually supposed to, you know, deal with the international news. So I was sitting there. We were talking about Russia and Ukraine and how it's all going down there, and you know, it was a thing that was being discussed in the, you know, editor's office, and just, you know, when we had lunch we talked about it, and they were sort of adjusting their newspaper, their physical newspaper, after the event, because the whole international section that was being taken out of the newspaper. And then there's being produced so much more stuff about the terror case and everything. So I guess they did react very much on the events, but I didn't quite feel it as much. But so I think it was more the conversations that I had in between actually doing work that sort of gave me the greatest, you know, insight of how they would handle, or how they are handling the terror. It's sort of a small newspaper. So we were 3 people sitting in the international section, where one of the guys he moved to do national stuff instead. So you know, they did sort of fiddle around with the people a little bit to cover the national news instead. But it was very interesting, especially that newspaper that I was following, or the woman that I was shadowing, the newspaper that she works at. It's they very much talk about ethical issues. It's a lot about religion and ethics and faith and belief and everything. So every time they sort of write about anything, actually, they sort of talk a lot about the perspective. How should we present this topic or this issue? And I think that was very, very interesting to hear them talk about the shootings, because they focused a lot about they focused on the guy Dennis Dan, the guy who was shot in front of the synagogue, and the guy who was writing his he was writing we call it a portrait. I'm not sure what it's called in English, but like a portrait of about Dan and what kind of man he was. To sort of, they bring a lot of background articles and to provide an insight. The media, the web media, it's just they're using all those buzzwords about terror and shootings and whatnot. Whereas this newspaper is sort of providing a bit more background, and that was very very interesting to follow, because I found that very, very necessary, because people, if they just read, a few articles about it, not even articles, but just read bits and pieces now and then, they might not get the right impression of what actually went down weekend.
Yeah.
So I found that very, very important. Yeah.
Definitely, and then the stereotypes start to come out, and people jump to conclusions, and then there's fear, and it's definitely an important thing to be very careful about that kind of thing, for sure. So that would have been really interesting to be in there that day, that's for sure.
Definitely. I did talk to another guy at my school. He was he's one of the guys who works at the biggest sort of broadcasting company, or whatever they're called in Denmark, and he was talking at my school, and he was talking about how they were. It's called Denmark's Radio, and that's one of the biggest broadcasting. But he was talking about how they were very precautious about using the actual word terror, and it wasn't until the police, I think, had confirmed about 3 times that this was actually a case of terror, that they used the word terror. Because you know how people, it's sort of one of those words that everybody reacts on. So it was just, I'm sorry, I just found it very interesting, because they actually do discuss the actual wording, and they do discuss how do we which angles do we use, and who do we talk to, and are we presenting it somehow objectively?
I was quite interested in the local coverage as opposed to the international coverage. I don't know. I was very interested as soon as I heard that these events had happened, to find out more about it and to really follow the story. And I did struggle a little bit to get the international coverage over here. How was obviously the local coverage would have been all over.
I think even now it's on all the front pages, and it's been 10 days. Well, they're starting to sort of do other stories now, but it's been all over the news. And I think that newspaper that I was on that following Monday, I think that was a pretty good example of what most of I don't think that most of the bigger newspapers actually took out the international sections, but they did definitely, pay more attention to the national stuff. It's been very interesting to follow, and they do all these different angles, and I think that's very good about. I think they've been very thorough, the media in general, and I found that very well. That's a very good thing, because sometimes you sort of we talked about all those stereotypes, and they tend to be presented or represented in the media all the time, but here I actually feel like it's being covered very thoroughly. So you get the ethnic Danes to talk, and you get the Jews and the Muslims, and the whole society actually sort of contributes to the coverage of the story. So I find that very. I mean, now it's sort of getting difficult because now it's all the politics that's going on right now, and so it's sort of taking a different sort of view away as it is right now. I think the first 5 days or so, it was very personal, and it was very, heartfelt and very emotional. The way they talked to the people they talked to and everything, they were being very emotional. Of course they were, we all were, but now it's getting more, as I said, it's getting more, about politics, and did the police do a good work? And I think the first week I didn't see one single article that was sort of criticizing the police, whereas because they all talked about how the police did a really good job, and I think they did as well, but they were being honored, and they were being told about these huge great sentences about how great the police were, and they did everything they could, and they did the right thing and everything, and that was the first week. And I think this week the media is starting to get more and more giving the police more and more critique, which is pretty interesting to follow, I think, because they've sort of been, I don't know if that's a weird conclusion to draw, but they've sort of been in the safe zone the first week, and then now people are starting to get more and more, asking more and more questions, and they have to actually, answer those questions. I think that's pretty interesting, but I think the bottom line is that it's been the first week was more, more personal, and more people wouldn't draw too many conclusions, and people wouldn't be too harsh on anyone. Whereas now we're really starting to look back at the events and say like what went good and what went not so good.
Now there's all these discussions on, is anti-Semitism rife in Europe, and these bigger picture kind of conversations coming out of it. Are people siding with the Jews? Are people siding with the Muslims? Like, I guess now that there's been time, people look back and look at these events and see, is there a bigger meaning behind it all? Is that something that the general public actually feel? Are these things people are talking about, or is this things just the media are talking about, I guess?
It's quite difficult to me to answer because I'm a journalism student, so I'm right in the middle of everything that we talk about all the time, and we have people from the newspapers and everything. They come to our uni and they talk about how they do and what they say. So I think automatically my friends will be interested in it. But I mean, especially the first week. I think last week everybody talked about it. Definitely, I don't know about the media. Definitely the front runner, but we talk about it as well. But I can't really tell if that's because I'm a journalist student or because that's me as a young Danish person.
Yes. Has there been any backlash towards the Muslim community that you can see? Has there been an increased feeling of discrimination or fear?
I'm not too sure about a general conclusion, but I do know that the newspaper have brought stories about. Actually, I think that was just on the following Monday, so it was pretty soon after the shootings. They brought a really good article about a Muslim guy. I think the heading was something about I'm scared that the Danes won't smile back at me now. And I think that was sort of showed how everything that he was feeling, and I suppose that everything, it isn't just him that's feeling it. It's a lot of people from the Muslim society. They fear that the Danes and the Jews and whoever else will, get sort of hostile or anything. And there are cases right now about Muslim people being, beat up. It's not a lot of cases because I don't think the Danish society is that, violent. I think that there are definitely cases where, Muslim people are being treated poorly following the events. But, then again, I don't have a very broad, I don't know a lot of Muslims. And they tend to sort of, without being too general, they tend to be not very interested in talking to the media, except from the very, very well integrated Muslims who study at uni with you and me, and just are basically just Muslim Danes. But it's difficult for me to say because even before the shootings, there were cases with Muslims being treated poorly, being beat up, and the other way around. I mean, so it's difficult for me to say if there have been more, but it's being brought more in the media.
I thought it was really interesting. I just read an article and it said about it was talking about the funeral of Omar el-Hussein, the shooter, and how there was an estimated 500 people that attended, a lot of them saying that they were showing support for the family and not, in fact, for him. But I thought that was quite interesting.
It's really interesting that you have to, all of a sudden they have to justify why they attend a funeral.
Yeah,
I think that's really weird. Why all the people. I don't remember the number of people, but at I think it was 2,000 people who went to the funeral of Dan Hassan, the Jew who was shot in front of a synagogue, and that was the Prime Minister and a lot of politicians and some people from the police and everything, and they didn't have to say why they were going. And I know that's a different story. I know that's a different sort of point of view, whether you attend the one funeral or the other. But I just find it very interesting that you have to justify why you attend a funeral. And even though he did all these things, and even though he was, probably a young man with a lot of, I don't even know. I mean, it's difficult for me to draw any conclusion of what kind of man he was, but he was 22 years old. He was young, and he was, I think he turned towards this ideology and saw something that he probably couldn't get from the Danish society or whatever. And I find that sad. And even more so, I know that his father did an interview for one of the newspapers where he said that he was really surprised that the shooter he did these things, and he was very surprised that he even had the idea to do so. But even though he did shoot these people, and even though he has caused a lot of pain and fear throughout Copenhagen, even though he's dead, but he still causes fear because that's the thing about terror. That it just this is sort of just the beginning. Now people start to walk around and worry and everything. So he's caused a lot of pain, I think, especially for the Muslim society, that they, as we talked about just before, that they have to take, make small adjustments, at least in their heads, that, this guy, he worries that we won't smile back at him because something that this, Omar did. But still, putting all those things aside, the things that he did, he was still someone's son and he was still someone's brother and everything, and why should you justify, why you attend the funeral? That seems pretty weird to me, at least.
I thought that was interesting, reading the comments of people that had known him, saying that they were very surprised that he'd done this, because while he had been in jail before and things like that. It seemed, quite out of character. It will be very interesting to see how, I guess, in the next few weeks, how things pan out.
Yeah, definitely. I don't know if you read about it, but there was where he was shot. The shooter Omar, where he was shot. It's called Swan Street. That's not important, but he was shot down by the police, and then the following couple of days, people put flowers there, and then I think it was. I'm not too sure, but I think it was Tuesday. A group of, I think, like 5 or 6 young people, all wearing black and wearing masks. They were going to the place, and they were in a very, fast and, I wouldn't say rude, I don't know how to explain it, but they were removing all the flowers from the scene, and putting up a sign saying that's not a Muslim tradition, so don't do this, don't put flowers there. And, that sort of small event, or whatever you'd call it, that got a lot of attention as well, because that was very, the police and I think everybody else have sort of tried to say, everybody just calm down. We don't want too many, follow-ups or reactions of the shootings. We don't want anyone else to get hurt. We don't want anyone else to, freak out or do something stupid. So, and they've said that as well, the funerals of Damsan and Omar and the Finn Nørgaard. He was the first one who was shot. His funeral was yesterday, and the police have sort of come out and said, everybody just take it easy, and so that was I think that was a huge contrast, that those people would go there and remove all the flowers and all the small candles and the notes that the people had written for him, and it was a weird discussion already, because people would talk about why would you put flowers in some a murderer's grave? Why would you bring flowers to someone who spread terror and fear in all of Copenhagen? Why would you sort of honor his memory and anything? So in the beginning it was a weird discussion, because people were asking the question, why do you put flowers there? He's a shooter, he's a murderer. And afterwards it became a weird sort of happening, that those masked guys, they came and removed all the flowers, and they were being very sort of, I wouldn't say violent, because they didn't do anything, but it was very harsh moves and fast moves, and the people who were standing there immediately sort of pulled away. And of course there were media present at the time, but they wouldn't say anything, they wouldn't talk to the media. So it became to me at least, personally, I think it was quite unnecessary. And I know that their sort of justification was that it wasn't a Muslim tradition to put flowers on, not on his grave, but the place where he was shot. But it's not a particular, at least not to my knowledge, not a particular Jewish tradition as well. Or it was just, to me, it's just weird to make that sort of statement.
Yes.
There's that whole grieving process, that people need different things, and if you need to put flowers there, you do that. And then it was just a weird thing, because it was a contrast to all the things people were saying all over Copenhagen. We were talking about, okay, just take it easy, and I tend to do the reverse thing. Whenever I see a girl with a scarf and anything now, when I see a Muslim, I smile even more, because we sort of need to stick together. We're in the same, part of the same society and in the same country, and we, because of this one guy, I wouldn't call him lunatic, but this sad young man, because of the actions of him, if we sort of start to break up, society is just going to go one way, and it's just down.
Yeah,
I think. Yeah.
Oh well, hopefully they can take a leaf out of your book and have that same mentality moving forward, the government and society, and just hopefully Danish people in general can really take that kind of attitude on board, because surely that's
I feel like most people are.
Yeah, because surely that's the only positive way forward, really, through something like this. So, I mean, even, the incident in Sydney that we had here a few months ago, I feel the same. I really hope that we can, that can help us all come together, as opposed to segregate us even more, because that would be a big tragedy. So, is there anything else that you want to add in particular? Anything that I haven't mentioned?
I don't think so. It's very difficult to talk about, because it's very abstract, and you can, when I first heard about the shootings, I thought, because the first shooting, that was Saturday afternoon. I think it was about 4:00 or something. I don't remember it precisely, but it was in the afternoon. And when I heard about that, I was like, we had I think 2 weeks before that, we had a shooting down the street from where I live, and it's usually gang related, and it's nothing, it doesn't really, well, it matters to me, but it doesn't involve me. But it's usually gang related, so I didn't really think much of it until the next morning, when I saw all the media coverage of it. And where was I going with this? Oh yeah, it's a very abstract thing to talk about, because there's so many different layers. And it's because we are a multicultural society, it's, we have even more layers to cover. And I think if we talk about media coverage, I think the media is doing a pretty good job to sort of cover the story from different perspectives and angles, and the view of different people with different beliefs and ideologies, definitely.